Every season, the top teams in the NBA tend to garner the most attention. This shouldn't come as any shock to people because, of course, the best teams tend to be the ones with the best players, and the best players winning the most are more often than not the most intriguing. Teams like the Lakers with LeBron James and Anthony Davis dominate headlines, the Clippers with Paul George and Kawhi Leonard do as well, the Nets this season have emerged as one of the most intriguing teams because of their superstar trio, people have taken note of the Jazz more this year because they have the best record in the league, and teams like the Bucks and 76ers have also had plenty of time in the spotlight. But there's one team that seems to get considerably less respect both from the media and from the fans, and that team is the Phoenix Suns, who are the topic of today's video. The Suns are a team that I believe have just as good of a chance to compete for a title as any of the teams I just mentioned, and yet it doesn't seem like anybody else views them like that either. So in this video, I'll be discussing the kind of season that they're having, how they've managed to exceed all expectations anybody could have possibly had for them prior to the season, and what makes them legit compared to their competition. Before we start though, it turns out about 65% of you watching right now aren't even subscribed to the channel, so please, if you enjoy the content, consider hitting the subscribe button, as not only does it help out a ton, but I would also very much appreciate it. Now with that being said, let's begin. So, as I said in the intro, the Utah Jazz have the best record in the league, as has been the case for most of the season. However, if I were to ask you who had the second best record in the NBA right now behind them, without looking it up, I imagine a lot of the answers would include teams like perhaps the Sixers or the Nets, who are sitting atop the Eastern Conference. Maybe some guesses would be on the Lakers, some would probably say the Clippers, who have been healthier than the Lakers so far while still playing well, but the answer is actually none other than the Phoenix Suns, who are only a game and a half behind the Jazz in the standings and have a better record than any team in the Eastern Conference. That's right, the Phoenix Suns would actually be the #1 seed in the East if they were in that conference. The Suns were a team very desperate for a breakout season because dating all the way back to when Steve Nash left the team in 2012, they've been pretty terrible every year since. There have been a few seasons where they came close to a playoff berth since then, including last year where they went undefeated in the bubble play-in games but still came up short, but this year, after countless tanking efforts and quite a few whiffed draft picks along the way, things are finally coming together for them. But as is the case with every newcomer to the top of the table, people tend to be hesitant to crown anyone until they prove themselves, which I guess is fair enough. At the end of the day, the postseason is what matters most, but at the same time, you can't just simply ignore what a team is doing in the regular season. Sure, there have been teams in the past that have completely dominated the regular season only to get exposed in the playoffs, with last year's Clippers team being the most recent example, and before that, a very common example people look to is the 2015 Atlanta Hawks team that won 60 games, and even though that team technically had 4 All-Stars that year, nobody really viewed them that way because Al Horford, Paul Millsap, Jeff Teague, and Kyle Korver were all really good players that season, but not necessarily literal, by definition, stars. That Hawks team also did make it all the way to the conference finals, which is no small task, but nobody remembers anything about their season except for the fact that LeBron and the Cavs swept them once they got there. This seems to be the kind of category that people view teams like the Jazz and the Suns this year, but since we're talking about the Suns today, allow me to explain exactly why I don't think they should fall into that category at all. For starters, we should begin by addressing the biggest and most obvious change between this year's Suns team and their teams from the previous seasons of missed playoff appearances, and that would of course be the presence of Chris Paul on this year's team. When healthy, Paul has gone to teams and completely elevated their play at pretty much every stop along the way of his career, and we saw it last year when he took an Oklahoma City Thunder team that was written off by pretty much everyone to the playoffs, and then we saw it again when he was with the Rockets, as he helped contribute in a huge way to their conference finals berth that very possibly could have been a finals berth had he not gotten injured that series. He began the rise of the Clippers organization when he went there after the team had suffered years of seasons in the basement, and so on and so forth. Paul may not have a finals appearance to his name yet, but he's a big-time player and one of the greatest to ever play the point guard position. His poise while running the show rubs off on everyone else, he masterfully dictates the tempo, he trusts those around him enough to give them the freedom to play their games, while also knowing when to take games over down the stretch himself and close games out. A guy like him is exactly what the team had been missing, and he's been the perfect addition to pair with Devin Booker in the backcourt. In the playoffs, you need a guy that you can trust to just give the ball to and let them work in the biggest moments, and the Suns have two guys that you can do that with, as Paul brings the veteran leadership and proven fearlessness in these moments, while Devin Booker is a rising star hungry to prove himself on the biggest stage as well. It's not just Chris Paul elevating the team this season, however, as they are actually incredibly deep top to bottom, which is an aspect of the team that also gets heavily glossed over. With the way the game is played today, offenses have been producing at a historically great level, but the phrase defense wins championships still for sure applies. However, the best teams are the ones who dominate both ends, and again, the Suns fit this criteria too. Only 4 teams in the league this year rank in the top 10 on both offense and on defense, with those teams being the Utah Jazz, Los Angeles Clippers, Milwaukee Bucks, and you guessed it, the Phoenix Suns. The Suns rank as the 7th best offense this year and the 5th best defense in the league, and everybody plays a part in that. The Suns have a terrific blend of youth and experience, with players like Chris Paul, Jay Crowder, and Torrey Craig bringing playoff experience to the table while playing strong two-way basketball. Then the team's youth has all really started to blossom. On top of the obvious guys like Devin Booker and DeAndre Ayton, players like Mikal Bridges, Cam Johnson, and Dario Saric have given them outstanding minutes as well. I've already made an entire video discussing Mikal Bridges and how he's proving to be one of the best 3-and-D guys in the league, playing elite perimeter defense, but Cam Johnson is also shooting about 40% from 3 and holding his weight on defense too, and Saric's impact on the bench unit cannot be overlooked. Saric is a power forward by nature, but he's embraced the backup center role on this team in order to earn more minutes, and in that role, his versatility as a scorer, passer, and defender in the small ball lineups that the team runs with the bench have really overwhelmed opponents at times. For so many contenders, you see lineups featuring starting lineups dominate, and then the numbers indicate that the bench subs in and things start to go wrong. But with the Suns, the bench not only continually maintains leads, but they've statistically built upon them plenty of times, which can really drain opponents that lack solid depth, because the solution is either you play your stars more minutes, tiring them out in the long run, or you just take the hit on the chin and try to climb back in later. With either Chris Paul or Devin Booker on the bench, the Suns still outscore opponents by minimum 5 points per 100 possessions, which is a huge boost. Being able to trust your bench that much is without question going to help in a playoff run. This was on full display in last night's game against the Miami Heat, who ever since Jimmy Butler has returned have been one of the hottest teams in the NBA and entered that game having won 6 of their last 7 games. The Suns beat the Heat by 20 points, a total blowout, and yet their starters stunk up the joint. Chris Paul only scored 5 points in the game, Devin Booker only scored 12 points in the game, and the lineups with the starters were actually the lineups that were keeping the game close for a while. The Suns' bench, on the other hand, thoroughly dominated the Heat when they were out there, and players like Cam Johnson, Dario Saric, Torrey Craig, and Cameron Payne led the charge to outscore the Heat by 20. This is far from a rare occurrence for the Suns' bench, and the fact that the Suns' star players don't have to feel like they have to do everything to pull out wins against good teams will make things even easier in meaningful playoff games. Now, at the end of the day, they're going to have to actually do it in the playoffs for people to put any faith in them, but they're more equipped to do so than people realize. They're a top 7 offense, as I said before, they're also a top 5 defense, they have 2 star backcourt players that can create offense both for themselves and others at an elite level, and their bench can hold it down without them. With the Lakers so banged up, their health will be a big question mark come playoff time. The Clippers proved last year that there's reason to doubt them in the playoffs. The Jazz are also a very new team to contending, and the Nuggets just suffered a brutal injury to Jamal Murray, so the West is very much there for the taking. I probably wouldn't say they're the favorites by any means to win the West, but simultaneously I wouldn't count them out at all. And with that being said, that's all I have for you today. Make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and comment down below how far you think this Suns team can go in the playoffs. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all next time.